Lesson 5 is pretty similar to previous lessons where we were solving equations for variables. So maybe solving an equation like this one is solved for d right now. D equals r times t. And this one is solved for I right now. I equals p times r times t. So we've been solving equations for numbers. And the difference in this lesson is that now we're solving formulas for given variables. So we're still doing pretty much the same steps. The only difference is the numbers are gone in this one. And we have letters that eventually are going to stand for numbers, but we're going to kind of rearrange the formulas and solve for letters. So here we have distance equals rate times time. So if you want to figure out how far someone traveled, then you would multiply rate times time. So this formula could be rearranged. It's solved for distance equals rate times time, but we could solve it for rate, we could solve it for time. So if we wanted to solve it for time, we could just divide both sides by r, and then we would have t, because those r's would cancel out, equals d over r, or distance over rate. So we can solve it for different letters. Same thing over to the right. We have interest equals the principal times the rate times time. So these are just common formulas that we can solve it for interest, or we could solve it to figure out what the time or the amount of time of the loan was. So we could divide this, since we're multiplying t by p times r, we could divide by p times r, and p times r divided by p times r is just 1, so that would be 1t on this side, so t would equal I over p times r, because we've got to do that to both sides. So that's just to get you warmed up. There aren't any numbers anymore, but we're still doing the same things. We're undoing multiplication with division. They're just replaced, the numbers are replaced with letters that represent the numbers. Hopefully that doesn't confuse you too much. Alright, so example 1, the formula for circumference of a circle is circumference equals pi times diameter. In other words, circumference equals pi d. C equals pi d. So pi, if you don't know what that is, you can put it into your calculator and it'll give you something along the lines of the number 3.141599265. That's as much of pi as I have memorized. So that's pi. It just stands for that number. And there's a button for it on your calculator. So we're going to solve for d. So we're going to get d alone on one side of the equation, or on one side of the formula. Formula is just what we call an equation that doesn't have numbers or is mainly letters, although pi is a number. So we're going to solve for d. So if we have c equals pi times d, well, we have pi is being multiplied by d, and we want to get d alone, so we're going to divide by pi on both sides. Divide by pi. So on the right side, pi over pi is 1, so we have 1d equals c over pi. So distance equals circumference over pi. So in the next step, it's going to ask if the circumference of a bowl is 18 inches, what is its diameter? So we're looking for diameter. That's why we solved for d. So d equals circumference over pi, just as we found out. In other words, d, which we're looking for, equals circumference, which is 18, divided by pi. And so you'll put that into your calculator, and we have 18 divided by pi So 18 divided by pi is 5.73 roughly. I rounded to the nearest tenth there. So D equals 5.73, and that's your answer. That's the diameter of the bowl. So the circumference, which is the length around the rim of the bowl, if that is 18, if you go around and measure it out and it's 18 inches, that means that the diameter is 5.73. So that length there that I just drew, that's 5.73. All right, example 2, solve d equals r times t for t. So distance equals rate times time. We're going to get t alone, so we're going to solve for time. So if we have d equals rate times time, d equals rt, and we're solving for t, we have r times t, so we can divide by r. Divide by what's being multiplied by t. And r over r is 1. Any number over any number, that same number is 1. So we have t equals distance over rate. Time is distance over rate, or t equals d over r. You could also write it as t equals d over r. Same exact thing. So find the time it would take Tom to travel 26.2 miles, that's one marathon, if his speed was 18 miles per hour. He must be riding a bike because that is very, very fast. 10 miles per hour is a 6-minute mile. So he is going very, very fast. He must be on a bike. So we're looking for time. Time equals distance. Well, they gave us a distance, 26.2 miles. And then divided by rate. Well, a rate would be 18 miles per hour. So per tells me that it's a rate. So 26.2 divided by 18 is t equals 1.455 repeating. I could have rounded that to 1.46, but that is how long it would take him to do this marathon. To do this 26.2 miles would be 1.455 hours. So that would be the amount of time for that one. So we're just moving around letters, and then once you have the letters moved around for what you're solving for, then you start to plug in distance and rate, depending on what the problem tells you to plug in, and that's how we're going to solve these problems.